October morning 1941, at the Navy Yard in the early light. Before sunrise something happened that no one expected. A silent patrol walked along the wooden pier. Their boots tapped on wet planks. The air was cold and still above the dark water. A thin mist drifted between the ships. Nothing looked unusual. Nothing looked tense. The harbor seemed half asleep. But inside the guard office a message waited that would change the morning. A shore patrol supervisor held a small strip of exposed film. It had been found near a storage shed during a routine sweep. The strip looked harmless. It was small and curled. It showed faint outlines that were too unclear to read. But it should not have been there. Film in this part of the yard was controlled. Film outside the darkroom meant someone had taken pictures without permission. The supervisor felt a slow unease as he held it. He placed the strip in an envelope, then walked toward the command building. Inside the building, the air felt heavier than the fog outside. A watch officer studied the strip under a lamp. The light revealed shadows of hull shapes. The officer kept his face steady, but the room grew quiet. He asked for the log of film usage. The log showed no missing rolls. That meant someone had used a private camera. That meant someone had walked close to the fleet with a lens that no one approved. The officer lowered the lamp. He knew what it suggested. Someone inside the yard might be watching the ships for a foreign power. Patrolmen were ordered to expand their watch. They walked slower than usual near each pier. They watched the workers. They studied how men carried their tools. They looked for small details that felt wrong. The docks were busy during most days. Crates moved. Engines thumped. Ropes tightened. Yet something in the air felt off. A quiet tension grew in the spaces between steps. At the far end of the pier a civilian worker moved with the first light. He carried a lunch pail at his side. He wore a heavy jacket and kept his head low. Workers like him were common. They repaired crates. They loaded supplies. They lifted ropes and fueled the ships. They were trusted because they had always been there. But this morning a patrolman noticed how the man paused near the destroyers. He stood still for a moment too long. He looked at the holes with a gaze that was not the gaze of a laborer. It was the gaze of someone memorizing shapes. The patrolman felt a prickle at the back of his neck. He told a superior that something looked strange. The superior did not react at first. Workers paused often. Workers were tired. But the film strip still sat in the envelope. The officer did not dismiss the concern. He told the patrolman to keep watching. He told him to stay close but not obvious. The worker lifted his lunch pail again. The sun rose a little higher. Light hit the water in sharp silver lines. The man walked toward the gate. His steps were steady. He did not hurry. But the patrolmen stepped into position. They waited for him to pass. They prepared to stop him. Something in the air felt ready to break. The officer opened the envelope again. He held the film strip under the lamp. He saw the faint outline of a ship that should not have been photographed. He placed the strip on the table. He looked at the door. Then someone knocked. The door opened, and the watch officer stepped into the command room. The envelope lay in his hand. The air inside felt warmer than the pier, but heavier too. Officers stood near a large table. Lamps glowed above maps that showed the shape of the harbor. No one spoke until the officer placed the envelope on the table. The thin strip of film slid out. It lay under the lamp like a single thread of danger. The senior officer leaned forward. He studied the faint shapes on the strip. He saw the curve of a hull. He saw the outline of a gun mount. He saw the shadow of a mast that belonged to a ship preparing for deployment. These images were not sharp. They were not detailed. Yet they were clear enough to show that someone had taken the picture from the pier. The senior officer straightened. The room grew quiet. He knew that a single photograph could reveal more than a page of written notes. He knew that foreign analysts could read the story behind every shadow. The officer walked to a shelf and pressed a switch. A small device on the table came alive with a soft hum. This was the yard monitoring system. It tracked patrol movements and logged gate entries. It also recorded times when restricted lights were switched on near sensitive ships. The hum of the system filled the room. Its glow cast long shadows across the walls. The officers watched as the device revealed entries from the past week. The patrol logs showed a pattern. A worker had passed the same pier at unusual times. Not once, not twice, several times. The senior officer felt a slow tension rise in his chest. The pattern matched the film strip. The man seen at dawn fit the movements on the log. The officer tapped the table. He told the team to check the radio reports from the night watch. A technician stepped to the radio set and began to scan the log. The set hissed in the quiet room. Lines of text in the log were simple yet heavy. They showed a change in the night watch routine. A patrol had been shorter than usual near the destroyers. During that gap, someone could have raised a camera and clicked the shutter. Outside the room, the harbor began to wake. Engines hummed as crews arrived for duty. Ropes tightened as ships prepared for the day. But inside the room, everything stayed still. Officers studied the map. They knew which ships had been at the pier. They knew which ones carried new equipment that foreign governments would want to see. They knew that a single photograph could reveal refit schedules and readiness status. The senior officer asked for the list of workers with access to the pier at dawn. The list was short. Workers with routine tasks. Workers trusted for years. Workers whose names never stirred suspicion. But trust was no longer enough. Not with the film strip on the table. Not with the pattern in the logs. Not with tension rising overseas each day. The officer folded his hands behind his back. His voice stayed low. He ordered discreet surveillance. No confrontation yet. No alarm. Watch the man. Follow him. Track each step. Do not let him know that the Navy is watching. The hum of the monitoring system kept filling the room. The lamp kept shining on the strip of film. The officers looked at the faint outline of the hull one more time. The shape on the film was small yet dangerous. It meant someone had been gathering evidence of the fleet. It meant someone had already crossed a line that should never be crossed. The senior officer took a breath. He knew that the next photograph could reveal even more. He knew that foreign analysts could combine the images with other fragments to build a picture of American strength. He knew the threat was real. Then the radio on the table crackled. A patrolman sent a message from the pier. The worker had arrived. He carried the same lunch pail. He walked toward the destroyers. The officers looked at one another. The morning was no longer quiet. The patrolman watched the worker move along the pier. The morning light touched the water with a pale glow. Cranes stood still above the ships. A soft hum carried across the deck plates. The worker kept his head low. He walked with steady steps. He paused near the same destroyer he had paused near before. His hand rested on the lunch pail for a moment longer than usual. The patrolman felt the same prickle he had felt the day before. Something in the man's rhythm felt wrong. Naval Intelligence officers watched from a distance. They stood behind a row of stacked crates. They kept their hands still. They kept their eyes on the worker. They noted each pause, each turn, each hesitation. The worker did not know they were there. He looked like every other laborer who carried ropes and checked crates. Yet small details separated him from the rest. The way he slowed near the ships. The way he positioned himself to look across the deck. The way his shoulders tightened when patrolmen passed near him. Inside the command room, the senior officer studied the logs again. The monitoring system showed another detail. Lights near the destroyers had been switched off for a short moment during the night. Not long. A brief window. Long enough for someone to slip into a shadowed corner. long enough to take a photograph without being seen from the deck. The senior officer marked the time on the chart. It matched the worker's route from the day before. The pattern grew stronger. The officer called for radio observation. A technician stood by the set. He checked recent transmissions from nearby embassies. Some signals were normal, some were routine, but a few were unusual. Short bursts at strange hours, signals that did not match ordinary diplomatic schedules. The timing made the air inside the room feel colder. The officer understood that foreign eyes could be waiting for any new image. Back on the pier, the worker moved closer to the destroyers. He looked at the hull. He looked at the cranes overhead. He looked at the waterline where the ship met the tide. His eyes moved with a slow focus. His hand shifted on the lunch pail. A faint click sounded. The patrolman tensed. The worker moved away, as if nothing had happened. The patrolman saw the small motion of the man's thumb on the lunch pail handle. A simple shift. Too simple. Too calm. The intelligence officers stepped forward. Not close enough to confront him. Close enough to see his movements clearly. They watched him adjust his jacket. They saw the outline of something small inside the fabric. A shape too firm to be cloth. A shape that looked like a small device. Inside the command room, the senior officer spoke in a steady voice. He said that the pattern was no longer a coincidence. He said that the film found at the shed was not an accident. He said that someone had taken more than one picture. The room stayed silent as the officers absorbed the weight of the words. The senior officer touched the film strip on the table. He said the truth was now clear. Someone had been gathering images of the fleet. Outside, the wind shifted. The surface of the water rippled. The worker walked toward the far pier where the shadows were deeper. The patrolman moved to new positions. Quiet. Controlled. Ready, the senior officer lifted the radio microphone. He ordered the patrolman to stand by. No rush. No noise. Let the man reach the gate. Let him carry the pail. Let him make the final move that would answer everything. On the pier, the worker stepped into the shadow of a large supply crate. He adjusted his jacket again. The intelligence officers saw the faint shape of the camera inside. The patrolman near the gate took a slow breath. The noose around the pier had tightened. The truth was seconds away. The worker stepped from the shadow into the thin morning light. His steps were slow but not careless. His hand stayed close to the lunch pail as he moved toward the gate. The patrolman near the gate stood ready. His breath is steady. His stance is firm. The worker approached with the same routine pace he used every day. Yet something in the air felt sharper than steel. A tension that stretched across the pier like a drawn line. The moment he reached the gate, the patrolman raised his hand. He asked the worker to stop. The worker froze. His eyes stayed on the ground. The patrolman asked him to open the lunch pail. A long, quiet silence hung between them. The worker opened the lid. Inside lay a folded cloth. Beneath it lay a pack of cigarettes. Beneath the pack lay a small paper-wrapped object. The patrolman lifted the cloth. He lifted the pack. He lifted the paper. Then he saw it. A small camera sat in his hand. Light slid across its surface. It was loaded with exposed film. The worker did not run. His shoulders sagged. His eyes stayed low. He whispered that the cigarettes were payment. His voice was thin like a thread ready to break. The patrolman said nothing. He signaled to the other patrolman. They stepped forward. They took the lunch pail. They escorted the worker toward the security room. Inside the room, the light was dim. A table stood in the center. The senior intelligence officer waited. The patrolman placed the camera on the table. The officer unwrapped it slowly. He opened the small hatch. A roll of film slid into his hand. He held it to the light. The faint outline of a hull appeared on the surface. Another outline showed a deck mount. A third outline showed a mast that had been refitted only days before. The officer placed the film roll on the metal table. The sound was soft yet heavy. It was the sound of confirmation. He asked the worker who gave him the cigarettes. The worker said he did not know the man's real name. He described simple meetings near a warehouse door. Small talk at first. A pack of cigarettes, then a request. Then another. Then the first picture. The worker said he believed the images were harmless. He said the ships were in plain sight. He said he needed the cigarettes. His words fell into the quiet room with a dull weight. The officer asked him how many rolls he had delivered. The worker looked at the floor. He whispered the truth. More than one. More than two. Enough to matter. Enough to reveal patterns. Enough to help foreign eyes rid the strength of the fleet. At that moment the door opened. A runner stepped inside with a report from the radio room. Signals from a foreign embassy had increased during the same weeks the worker had taken the pictures. Short bursts. Strange hours. The timing matched the worker's story. The officer took the report. He placed it beside the film roll. The truth no longer floated in shadows. It sat on the table in plain sight. The officers stepped into action. Orders spread across the yard. Patrol routes changed. Gates locked. Workers checked. Tools inspected. The quiet morning burst into movement. Men rushed across the docks with firm steps. The air filled with the sound of boots and radios. The scene shifted from suspicion to crisis in a single breath. In the command room, the senior officer looked at the film roll again. It was small, it was simple. Yet it carried the power to weaken the fleet. It carried the power to guide an enemy hand. He closed his eyes for a moment. He understood the danger. He understood the cost. Then he opened his eyes. The next steps would shape everything. The docks were quiet the next morning. The cranes stood still. The fuel lines hung without movement. The workers arrived in small groups. Their footsteps sounded sharper than usual. Patrolmen watched every gate with new attention. The yard no longer felt like a place of routine work. It felt like a place holding its breath. Inside the command building, the officers gathered around a long table. The film roll sat in the center. It was now sealed inside a small metal box. The senior officer spoke in a steady voice. He explained that one worker had taken photographs for cigarettes. He explained that the images showed gun mounts and hull shapes. He explained that the pictures could have traveled beyond the country through diplomatic channels. The officers listened in silence. Each man understood the weight of the mistake. The first order issued that morning changed everything. Cameras were banned without written approval. Patrols doubled. Identification checks were strengthened. Workers were asked to empty their pockets at the gate. No exceptions, even ordinary tools were inspected. A wrench, a cloth, a lunch pail. Everything passed under watchful eyes. Workers felt the change immediately. Some whispered that the Navy no longer trusted them. Others understood the reason. War was moving closer each day. Every detail mattered. Every person mattered. The docks that once felt open now felt guarded. A single photograph had closed the last door of casual trust. Inside the briefing room, the worker sat alone. His hands were still. His voice was quiet. He answered each question without hesitation. He explained the simple meetings near the warehouse. He explained the cigarettes. He explained that he believed the images were harmless. He said he never imagined that a foreign government could learn so much from a picture of a ship in daylight. He said he took the pictures because he needed the cigarettes. His reasons were small. The consequences were not. Naval Intelligence studied his story closely. They compared it with other reports. They saw that foreign embassies had increased their coded transmissions during the same weeks. They saw that diplomatic couriers had left the city more frequently. They could not open the diplomatic pouches. They could not see inside the messages. But the timing was enough. The images had likely traveled. The fleet's secrets might now be in foreign hands. Officers understood what this meant. A single worker had given away fragments of information. But fragments were never just fragments. Analysts could use them to estimate readiness and repair schedules. Analysts could guess deployment patterns. Analysts could study the strength of each ship. The danger was real. The enemy might not see the whole fleet, but they could now read its outline. The command reacted with speed. Training sessions began that same week. Workers learned why a simple photograph mattered. They learned how analysts studied shadows and angles. They learned how even a small image could reveal a major secret. Many workers were shocked. They did not know the power hidden inside a routine picture. The lesson spread across every pier. In time, the Navy changed its policies nationwide. Access points tightened. Background checks expanded. Officers monitored movement with new discipline. The dockyards that once ran on trust now ran on awareness. The worker's mistake became a warning told in every briefing room. His story carried a message that no one could ignore. When the sun set that final evening, the docks were still again. The ships rested at anchor. Patrolmen walked steady routes. The film roll that started it all remained locked in a metal box, small and silent, yet powerful enough to reshape the Navy. The lesson was clear. Danger did not always arrive through spies in the shadows. Sometimes it arrived through ordinary hands carrying a simple pack of cigarettes.